Wow, was that a journey? I spent the last couple of days, other than creating blog posts and talking about routers blowing up and reconfiguring routers, on a journey that all started with PHP in a Docker container with NGINX. And honestly, I still haven't even accomplished that, but I've learned a lot about Docker. So I got a couple of new Docker videos coming to you, and today's video, if you haven't already read the title rather, is going to be about creating an NGINX server with Docker Compose. Now, I know I showed you just a couple of days how to do that with Docker build and how to build out that image, but that somewhat leaves you stranded in ways with modifying your files. You can run a command called exec -it, log into the container and edit your files, but I don't necessarily like that for numerous backup reasons and other things that I don't need to get into for this video. What this video is going to cover is how to install Docker Compose, and set up your first NGINX server on a fairly basic website, just basically a boilerplate to say that it works, with a Proxmox LXC because, well, why not? We learned how to do that already, and use the Docker Compose functionality. So with that, let's head over to my desktop here, and you notice that I've tried to keep it fairly laid out, but there's actually even files off this. So this is actually an ultra wide, so you don't even get the full image of my desktop. Yeah, I know, flexing a little bit, I guess. Truth be told, it costs less than a normal monitor on a Black Friday sale at Walmart. So I picked it up because at the time I was working, and my work computer I provided my own monitor for, and it only had one HDMI port, and the USB-C port that I could break out into a multi-monitor setup also provided power, and I didn't feel like getting a whole docking station, so this was the cheaper option ultimately for me. Well, anyways, back to our tutorial. I spent most of the morning here writing up this particular blog post, which basically entails the whole entire process of how to use Docker and Docker Compose to set up this server, and that will be linked in the description. You will notice one thing here right at the start, and that we're not doing it in this post with the LXC container inside of Proxmox. You'll have to default, if you want to do that, to either this video or the previous write-up that we did for the previous video. But basically, at the point of it finishing installing Docker, you could pick up on this tutorial, install Docker Compose, and go the rest of the way with this tutorial if you so choose to use an LXC container. All right, so I will be copying and pasting from this blog post, but it will be in the background here on my ultra-wide monitor. Now, I'm kind of struggled with the Streamlabs software that I'm using to do screen recording, and if any of you guys know how to do a display capture and have my mouse show, that would be great. I did a little bit of research this morning and ultimately came to a quick realization that I was diving down a rabbit hole that I didn't want to go down right now, as I had a lot of other things on my mind and I wanted to get this content to you, not necessarily as quick as possible, but I definitely wanted to get it out to you before I abandoned the video and moved on in my own thoughts, which happens from time to time, unfortunately, probably for most of you, because the projects I work on, I'm sure some of you are probably pretty interested in. But with that, when we come up here, you can see my mouse. Now, I want to bring special attention to this button right here, because when I bring up the display capture to make this all larger so that you can see it, you're not going to be able to see where my mouse is. So we're going to need to click on that button. I think everything else should be fairly easy to describe what to do, and that button's called Create CT. If you're looking for it, it should be pretty easy. So here's my display capture of this window, so it's a little bit larger for you to see, and the first thing we're going to need to do is create a container for this video. And I hit Create CT, just as I mentioned before, and another window is going to show. We need to give this container a name, and I'm just going to call it VE Video today, and I'm not even going to spell video right. And we need to give it a password. So with that, we do want to keep this as an unprivileged container. There's no need to give this privileges, and we can keep nesting checked. We'll hit next, and if my windows stop popping up from my old password manager, we'll see that we are asked for a template. Now I'm clicking the downwards caret, and you can see that I have an Ubuntu 2210 standard template already downloaded, and we are going to go ahead and use that template. And now we're going to choose disks and 1 CPU. We're going to leave 512. Maybe I'll up it to a gig. You can type in this box. I'm just choosing to hit the up arrow. And now we're going to use our network settings of DHCP because I'm lazy today. You can use static. Just note that when you enter the IP address that you place the slash and the CIDR notation, or your IP address won't work. I know people have struggled with that in the past with some of my other comments, and I've been pretty certain and pretty hard on pointing that out since, because I know it can be a struggle. It caught me the first few times too. We'll leave DNS the same as our host, and when we hit next, we can confirm and we can press finish. This will make our container. So now that we have our container finished, it is right here. Now, if we want this to start up when the system starts up or reboots or something like that, excuse me, we can go ahead and click options and start at boot. Now, since this is a demo for you guys for today, I'm not going to do that. But if this was actually a legit web page that you were planning to host from your Proxmox server, that would probably be something that you would want to do, because if you had a power failure or something, you definitely want, when the system boots up, for this container to activate. But under here in features, we're going to highlight it, and then we're going to go up and click edit. Now, I'm moving my mouse so you can kind of see where it is and the edit button is. So when we click edit, we're going to check the key CTL here. If we don't check this, Docker won't run appropriately or at all. I don't even believe it'll install inside of our LXC container in here in Proxmox. So we're going to hit OK. And now we're ready to actually boot this image and start the Docker installation process. So as I press start, we'll see the container come alive. And I'm going to now go back to the full desktop version. And there's the full desktop version. And I'm going to open my console window. And we see that a console window appears here. At this point, I'm going to cut this video and I'm going to set up my screen capture so you can see what this window looks like a little bit better. I'll be back in just a second. All right, so we're back, and you can see that the window hasn't changed at all, but I've made it larger so that it's easier for you to view. And we're going to log in with root and the password that we set up when we created this container. Now, the first thing I always do the second I create a container is I run an apt update and apt upgrade-y. This updates my repositories and installs any available updates. As you can see in this case, we had 64 updates that needed to be installed for this image. All right, so now that we have the updates done, we can start installing Docker. Now remember, I'm going to be copying and pasting from that blog post that I showed you before. And if you want to see any of those commands, go ahead and look for the link to the blog post in the description below. So the first thing we need to do is install Docker's dependencies. Now, some of these dependencies allow us to create certificates and other things we need to do to verify that Docker is indeed the Docker website and everything is working correctly. And we're going to use the command apt-get install-y, so we answer yes, and we're installing the apt transport HTTPS, the CA certificates, curl, GNUGP, which I believe is another certificate, and software properties common. I do want to mention that it is the beginning, it's March of 2013 here, and Docker has changed their stuff quite frequently as far as key rings and files and stuff. So if you're experiencing problems with some of these files not working, go over to the Docker website and get their directions for this. It will help you out. All right, so next we need to do is use curl to grab the GPG key from Docker. and install it. We're going to do that with this command. And now we should be able to add the repository to our container to go ahead and install Docker. And I did see a little bit of a warning there. Let's go ahead and continue and see if we run into any problems. So the next thing we'll have to do is update the repositories again. And now we'll find out if indeed we have a little bit of a problem with that keyring being stored in the legacy trusted file. And we can do that by running the command apt install, and we're going to install docker ce cli and container.io. It looks like they did indeed install without any error messages, so that's a pretty good sign. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. Looks like we had a package delivered, and the mailman was letting me know that he had dropped one off. So now that we installed that, we would normally start installing Docker Compose. But I want to jump ahead a little bit and actually just check the version of Docker to make sure that it did indeed install correctly because of that error message. And it looks like we do have version 23.01, so it looks like it installed correctly. So we can move on, and we can again use Carl to grab some more files, in this case the binaries for Docker Compose, and we can then unpack them into their location with this command right here. So now we should have Docker Compose. We now just need to run a chmod command that's going to allow us to make the binary executable so that we can use it. And since we already checked the version of Docker and made sure it was running, let's go ahead and also check the version of Docker Compose. And it looks like we have 1.29.2 build installed. Alrighty, so the next thing that I like to do is never run a container for very long with the root user. So let's go ahead and create a new user here. We're going to call our user VE, but note that you can call your user whatever you want. The steps are going to be the same. So we're going to do add user, and mine's VE. We're going to give it a password and another password, and yes, the information is correct. Now we have a user. Now we want to again run add user VE, and we want to add sudo this time, and Docker. This should make Docker hopefully run without sudo. I have had mixed success with this, but this is the suggested way of doing so. All right. The last thing we're going to need to do is actually disable the root password or disable the root user account so it's no longer working. In order to do that, though, we're going to have to log out and log back in with the VE account. We can type exit, and now we're going to log in with VE and the VE password. Now we can type sudo passwd-l and root. Enter the VE password, and now root is disabled. So just like you saw me log in before, we could always test this by going exit, and we can try root, and we'll get password now good. There we go. All right, so now that we have this up and running, it's time to start building our YAML file for our Docker Compose so we can actually host our website from using Docker Compose to this container. One thing before I go and set all that up and come back that we want to take note of is the IP address of this container, because we are going to be using SSH from this point on. It makes copying some of the files from my computer much easier and just allows me to have a little bit more of an easy feel than this. If you're happy here at this window, feel free to keep using it. I did for quite a long time. All right, so to check the IP address, we're going to run IP address, and it will spit out the address. So the address we're looking for is going to be the ETH0, and ours is going to be 192.168.52. Now, I'm going to say that I made a configuration for in this file at this exact moment from looking at this IP address. This won't matter for your tutorial, but when I come back, I do want to know our IP address will change because I actually need to change the VLAN, or in Proxmox's setup, actually the bridge that's connected to the VLAN, to put this container in the correct spot in my network. So that'll cause my DHCP server to assign a different IP address to it when it reboots. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so I'm back, and you can notice a few different things that have changed other than my hardware. So that Amazon package that I mentioned was delivered was my new mouse right here. It's a Logitech M720. So far, I like it. It's a Bluetooth mouse, and it allows me to keep more of the USB-C ports on my 2017 era MacBook Pro available so I can use things like charging as I record videos and my extra monitor. I also got a USB-C to USB-C microphone, or not microphone, but cable for my microphone. I use a Tornor, or T-O-N-O-R, TC30 microphone, which has a USB-C port on the back of it. I quite enjoy it, and since we switched to it, I have had very little complaints from you guys about audio quality, so I think it's pretty good. Anyways, moving on with our video, I've added or set up all of the files that we need for us to configure our YAML file and get our server up and running that we built a few minutes ago in a container with Proxmox. So the first thing I want to do is enlarge our Atom screen here. And yes, I use Atom for most of my text editor programming things. I'm here on a Mac if you haven't already noticed, haha. And I just quite enjoy working with Atom. So I don't know if it's available for Windows, but it might be something to look into. Definitely not a paid promotion, just something that I enjoy. In fact, we've never had a sponsored video on this channel, so anything that's mentioned is mentioned and purchased solely and entirely by either channel profits or by me. Now, that's not to say that I'm not interested in doing a sponsored video. If you know anybody at TP-Link, I would very much enjoy doing a video with them coming mid-year when we get back to Maine. I want to do a more in-depth network upgrade up there and eliminate the SG-1000 box. If you've been following a few of my blog posts that I've been putting up more recently, you'd know a little bit more about what I'm talking about there. Anyways, so back to this video, and enough talking about extra things. You can see, and I'm looking at this, wondering if I can make it bigger for you. So hold on as I make some adjustments here. All right, so I hope you can see that a little bit better now. And this is the YAML file that we're going to use to run Docker Compose. Now, you notice the title of the file is Docker Compose, and by my understanding of the way the commands work that we're later going to run, the file has to be called dockercompose.yaml, all in lower cases. Now, version 3 represents the version of the layout or the syntax that we're going to configure this file in, and then we say services, which are the Docker services that we want to either run or create. Now, test is our container name, so it will be called test. Obviously, this is not a production or even application that I'm in development building. I'm building this solely for this video, right from the Proxmox container up. Our image is going to be here, and then we're going to call that NGINX, and we want the latest version. Now, something I do want to note, because with YAML files, I've had many headaches in the past whenever I use them, is spacing matters. So our server name here, test, has 1 space. Images, ports, and volumes have 3 spaces, and their sub-information here have 4 spaces. So Inside of here, we have images, and we're going to call the NGINX image at the latest version. Ports, we're going to assign port 80 in our container to port 80 on our server. And now we're going to bring over the two other files we want. Now we're actually linking those files, and I'll show you a little bit more with the index.html file, but we're actually linking those files to the files in the directory that we're grabbing them from in our server. So when we push these up to our server with SCP in a minute, I'll show you a little bit more, but we'll be able to edit the index.html file from the server, even though it's in the container, which is an advantage for building Docker containers this way versus building them with the Docker file like I showed you in one of the previous videos. Okay, so with that noted, we're going to pass in the NGINX config file under volumes to the path here that we would normally send it to when we set up NGINX. And we're also going to pass our index.html file to our default or root path for the server. And I'll show you more on that here when we get to the NGINX config file. But let's first look at the boilerplate, and I just created a really simple boilerplate here for the index.html file. Basically, I have a title, my first HTML, and a basic bare minimum. It's not quite the bare minimum required for HTML. I think it's a little, but it's basically the bare minimum that you're ever going to use if you build an HTML file. So I just put that in here. Now, if we go to our NGINX config file, this is also basically the bare minimum required to host a website. So we have our server block, starts here, ends here. We have our port we're going to listen on, which in our case is 80. And then we start our location block. Our location block is going to tell us where our initial first load web page is, or our page in general. And we have a slash because it's the entry page, so it's going to be in.x.html. This is a single page website. And we specify that our root is at USR share nginx.html, and our index file is called index.html. All right. So with that, we can go ahead and we can get rid of Atom on our screen, and we can bring up our SCP window. Now, you don't have to do this with SCP. You can do this all on your server, or you can use another tool you want. So here's my command. I am passing a file from my desktop, which actually happens to be right here and over here, and it contains all the files in our Atom window here. And you can see the file again broken down and going down there. Okay, so I am passing that file with SCP. So I go SCP, it's a file, so it's a directory. So I'm going to do a -R for a recursive. I am going to then put the path to the file that I want to send up. Then I'm going to put the username. I'm going to put at the server, in my case 192.168.64. Remember, I told you that IP address was going to change a little bit ago in the video because I had it in the wrong section of my network. That's my configuration fault, and it's no fault for, or should provide no problem for any of you setting this up with a single bridge on your server, kind of a default Proxmox setup. And then I'm going to pass it, since my username is VE, to home/VE. So this will pass everything up from the server itself to, or pass everything from my computer, the computer that we're filming here and doing the editing on, up to the server itself. You don't have to do this again. I know I said this once. You can do this all on the server, but this is how I'm choosing to do it. So I'm going to hit enter my system password, and send this all up. Now, the process for SCP might be a little bit different for Windows. Obviously, we're on a Mac. I know it's very, very similar for Linux, but I've never tried to do it on Windows. I don't run Windows horribly often. We do have some Windows systems here in the house. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I use it for gaming and other things. I just don't do this type of work on Windows. I grew up on Macs, and I feel more comfortable on them. Not really more comfortable. I just this is what I choose to use. I guess it is kind of more comfortable. All right. So we're going to get rid of that window, and we're going to bring up another command. Nope, wrong one. We're going to bring up another window. Now I know the text is a little bit smaller here, and this window actually goes off screen. When we run a few commands later on, you're going to have some information cut off. But I wanted to bring it up as large as I could for you, so I did stretch it out and push it off the screen recorder a little bit, just so that I could show you the information in the commands and you could view them a little bit easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is SSH into my container, and here's my container that we set up before. Now, if I was to run an ls, you can see that folder VE put in there, and I am actually going to cd, and change directory is what cd stands for, if you didn't know that, and I'm going to head over to the v command folder, and we can run ls, and we see our Docker Compose, our index.html, and our NGINX config file that we spoke about earlier. And I actually could run a nano, and I know this probably isn't the best practice, but we're in SSH, so I can do it. And you can see that the file matches that of the one that we had on wrong priorities. I got to get rid of this, and we can show it here. So it matches that of the one that we set up on Atom, and I showed you a few minutes ago. All right, so we'll get rid of that, and back comes our window. All right, so now we're able to hit Control X, and we save that because that was a nano command, and we can execute the command now, finally, to actually build our Docker image from the NGINX image using Docker Compose. So the command to do so, if I keep hitting up for a minute here, and you can see I actually did a little testing and cleaning up, is going to be Docker Compose up-d. So I hit enter, it's going to pull the file down, and it's going to start the image. All right, so now with that all up and running, we can look at a few more commands. The first one I want to run is the Docker Compose ps command, and that's going to show us that this image is still running here. And usually this extends a little bit more off screen. That's why this window was big, but I am going to be more than happy that we can see that now. The next command, so we see that's running, and that's going to run in the background until the server shuts down. We don't have any commands here. We kept it very simple to keep this running. There are a few that we can add that'll actually have this container restart afterwards. But with that, we now have this up and running, and it's going to run in the background and serve our website. But if we wanted to stop it, we can run Docker Compose stop. Now, if we were to run Docker Compose ps again, we can see that the state is exit 0. It's not running. And we can bring it back up. And again, see it's changed with S. All right, so I now actually have a window. So let's go over. Let's look at what this looks like in the web browser, and I am going to do that, I believe, with this window. I need to close the SSH window out, and we can create a new tab, and we said it was 192.168.6.4, and we press enter, and you can see we get a blank page, but you want to pay attention to right at the world top, which unfortunately you can't see my mouse cursor, but the tab says My First HTML. So with that, we're actually have our first HTML page, our boilerplate page that's loaded. Now, if we were to hide this window again and open Atom and head to our HTML, you can see the only thing this page was supposed to show was a title, My First HTML. So what if we wanted a little bit more than that? It's H1, it actually doesn't need because it's inside of H1, and we'll close it. So this should add some text to the HTML file now. So we're going to save it, and we'll head back, in our case, to the SCP window. We'll resend the files up to the server, and if we are all lucky, which we should be able to reload this file and see text added. So instead of actually taking and having to rebuild the Docker image like we would have if we used Docker build like the previous tutorial, by using Docker Compose and linking these files to a directory inside of our host operating system or our server operating system, we're able to edit these files quite quickly and easily, so that either with SCP or with Nano or something like that, so as we develop, we can iterate more quickly without rebuilding files. This also means that images and space and cleanup are drastically reduced. I know when I was doing some development with Docker Build before I learned about Docker Compose, I filled up a 15 gig image in less than a day doing some testing work. Now, I was struggling getting things to work. I probably built 30 or 40 images, and I didn't clean up after myself because I was just trying to fastly iterate, and I just planned to delete the image and build another one when I was ready to go from a template. But regardless, this saves us from doing all of that. As you saw, I just pushed it to my server and was able to refresh, and everything worked. Now, in some scenarios, like the NGINX.config file, that may not be true. You might need to restart the host, but instead of, again, rebuilding the image, you're going to run Docker Compose stop, and then Docker Compose start, and everything's going to come up and be working again. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's going to be quite a bit longer than our normal videos, but I tried to go as in depth into this as I could and keep it as simple as possible, because I myself strayed away from Docker for a long time, preferring LXCs over Docker because of just the ease of understanding how to use them. The tutorials on the internet I found confusing, and I didn't understand them. And I also didn't like necessarily having images that I didn't understand exactly what is in them. So they were like built by some random person and they weren't official images, and I don't particularly like dealing with that. Anyways, enough with that rant. I hope you enjoyed tonight's video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And go ahead and check out the blog post that'll walk you step by step pretty much through this, other than some of the details like how to create the LXC image in Proxmox. You can do this in a VM if you wanted to. I prefer, especially for web hosting, where I'm not passing in USB ports and things like that, to use an LXC just because of resource management. Most of my servers are fairly lightweight. We did get this new Dell server a little bit ago, if you saw that video, and I do have a few more cores to deal with and a little bit more RAM, but traditionally I've been very, very resource bound. So with that, have a good night.